As a wedding gift, my in-laws presented us with plane tickets to the mountain regions, covering all travel and lodging expenses. This news thrilled me more than words could express. I had always dreamt of visiting the mountains. I had heard so much about their beauty, particularly the tales of how breathtakingly beautiful the local women were. They weren't just beautiful, people said, but striking enough to leave anyone speechless. From an early age, I'd been known for being a hopeless romantic, an incurable flirt. In my heart, I began to imagine what it would be like to immerse myself in the allure of that mountainous beauty, savoring every moment. Beside me sat my wife, Farzana, a virtuous and kind-hearted woman. She too was overjoyed at the prospect of a honeymoon in such an exotic place. However, my mother's face told a different story. She was not impressed. "What kind of gift is this?" she muttered. "It would have been better if they had given you a motorcycle or a car, something useful that could have helped you in life. What's the point of spending so much money on a trip that will be over in a few days?" My mother was an old-fashioned woman who saw no value in things like honeymoons. To her, they were frivolous and unnecessary. Quietly, my father even added, "What sort of shameless people give their daughter honeymoon tickets at the wedding? I don't think they're decent folks." It took a great deal of effort to keep my father from saying such things in front of Farzana. I tried to explain to my mother, "Look, she's from a wealthy family. We should be grateful that a millionaire's daughter has become a part of our home. Just think of all the dowry she brought. In time, you'll have that car or motorcycle, but please, don't talk like this in front of her." But how long could I keep my family quiet? Every guest who attended the wedding seemed to share the same mindset. Everyone murmured about how inappropriate it was to give a daughter honeymoon tickets as a wedding gift. Their remarks found their way back to Farzana. She became embarrassed, hurt, and deeply saddened. Farzana had married me for love. She wasn't fully aware of my family's old-fashioned mentality. It was up to me to reassure her. "Don't take their words to heart," I told her. "They're from a different time and have different views. But don't worry, this trip will be wonderful. We'll have a great time." I helped her pack and even bought her some new warm clothes because winter was approaching and the mountain areas were bound to be colder. We did some light shopping and soon it was time to leave. Our trip began with a flight to Lahore, followed by a scenic drive up into the hills. I had reserved a cozy, well-reviewed hotel for us to stay in. Farzana was ecstatic. She held my hand as we strolled along the winding mountain paths, her excitement evident in the way she marveled at the views. She had always wanted to travel and see the world, and this was her chance. Her family had given us these tickets, knowing how much she loved to explore. As we walked hand in hand along the rugged trails, Farzana chattered happily, making sweet, affectionate comments. Meanwhile, my eyes wandered. From the moment we arrived, I couldn't help but notice the stunning beauty of the local women. Their striking features and vibrant charm captured my attention. I found myself wishing I could reach out and embrace that beauty, but I was held back by Farzana's presence. Farzana was a simple, dusky-skinned woman whose appearance didn't particularly stir any romantic feelings in me. I wasn't drawn to her face, and at times I struggled to hold a conversation with her. On the other hand, I was a tall, handsome man who could easily attract beautiful women if I wanted to. Yet I had chosen to marry Farzana willingly. I had done so for one reason alone. She was the daughter of a wealthy father. Money was never a concern, and I knew marrying her would transform my fortune. But deep inside, I felt a nagging sense of dissatisfaction. Despite the comforts that came with this marriage, my wandering eye and indulgent nature left me yearning for something more. My attention often drifted from Farzana to the girls we passed on the mountainous trails, women who worked in the fields, their beauty enhanced by the rugged backdrop of the hills. As we walked further, we came across a small village nestled in the valleys. The village itself was a picturesque sight, its simplicity enhanced by the charm of its inhabitants. I couldn't help but notice how stunning the local girls were. Many had fair complexions and radiant features that made them appear otherworldly. My gaze fell upon one girl in particular, a shepherdess tending her flock. Her beauty was so striking that my eyes stayed fixed on her. It was as if a celestial being had descended to this earthly plane. I had never encountered such perfection before. Lost in the allure of her features, I barely noticed Farzana tugging at my arm. She had caught on to my wandering gaze and, clearly annoyed, asked, Did you come here with me or by yourself? Her tone snapped me out of my daze. I quickly changed my approach, gesturing toward the sheep and saying, "Look at those lambs. Aren't they adorable? I was thinking of getting you one as a gift." In truth, I hadn't been looking at the lambs at all. I was mesmerized by the shepherdess. Farzana's face softened, and she smiled at my comment, her irritation fading. "Yes, they're so cute," she exclaimed, stepping forward to pet the lambs. Relieved that she bought my explanation, I slowly moved closer to the shepherdess. The girl glanced up as I approached. As soon as our eyes met, she greeted me with a polite, "Salam, Sahib. Can I help you with something?" I nodded, captivated by her sparkling blue eyes. She quickly looked away, lowering her gaze in modesty. "This is our village," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle lilt. "We always welcome visitors and take good care of them. Would you like to eat something?" she added, glancing toward Farzana. Farzana politely declined, shaking her head, but I interjected. "What's the most special dish from your village?" I asked. Her face lit up at my interest, and she nodded enthusiastically. "I'll be right back," she said, disappearing into a small house nearby. Moments later, she returned carrying a box of dry fruit halwa. "This is our village specialty," she explained. I took the box from her hands, deliberately brushing her soft fingers as I did. Our brief touch made her smile, and that smile stirred something in me. Her expression made it clear. She liked me too. After all, I was young, tall, and strikingly handsome, the kind of man who could easily win any girl's admiration. Making sure to avoid Farzana's notice, I stole one last lingering glance at the girl. Then, with the halwa in hand, Farzana and I found a place to sit. We ate in silence, and as soon as we finished, I saw the shepherdess moving on, guiding her flock further down the valley. I wished I could follow her, but instead, I joined Farzana as we began our walk back to the hotel. On the way, we paused by a stream, the water gurgling peacefully as it wound through the rocks. Farzana chatted endlessly, marveling at the scenery and discussing the places we'd visited. But my mind was elsewhere. I was consumed by thoughts of the shepherdess, her beauty and grace captivating me even now. If I could have, I would have reached out and claimed that beauty for myself. Instead, I nodded absently to Farzana's remarks, all the while planning my next move. I decided I would return to the village the next day and try to see her again. My heart was completely enraptured, my thoughts entirely preoccupied with her. That night, exhausted from our day of travel, we returned to the hotel. Farzana fell asleep almost instantly, her soft snores filling the quiet room. I lay awake, my irritation growing. This wasn't the honeymoon I had envisioned. We had spent the entire day looking at mountains and streams, but there had been no intimacy, no meaningful time spent as a couple. Farzana's boundless energy during the day left her completely drained by night, and all she seemed to do was sleep. For me, the honeymoon meant something entirely different. If Farzana didn't give me the time I needed, I would imagine that beautiful girl in my arms as I lay down. The next morning, before my wife even woke up, I quietly left the hotel and headed straight to where I had seen those girls herding sheep the day before. Today, too, she was in the same place. This was a village, and here people woke up early and got to their work right away. When she saw me, she smiled and greeted me, then asked about Farzana. I told her Farzana was still asleep, and then softly, I added that I had come here to meet her. Hearing that, her smile deepened. She said, "Would you like some halwa, Sahib?" I gently declined, leaned toward her and said, "No, I would prefer some wine." My gaze lingered on her beautiful pink lips. For a moment she paused, looking straight at me, and then, as the meaning of my words dawned on her, her cheeks turned pink. She said, "Please have a seat, Sahib. I'll bring you some halwa." She went off and returned shortly with a special local dry fruit halwa. After placing it before me, she sat down nearby. I then asked her about herself. She explained, "I live with my father. He is quite old and often sick due to the cold, so he mostly stays indoors. I tend these sheep and goats to get by. My father is living his final days and wants me to marry before he passes away." As she said this, she gave me a deep look and then turned her gaze toward a beautiful waterfall flowing in the distance. Silence settled between us, but the sound of the falling water created a soft, melodious hum that filled the air. I had sat in this same spot with Farzana the day before, but somehow the beauty of this place didn't strike me as it did now, with this girl, Gulruch. I asked her lovingly, "Gulruch, do you have someone you like?" My tone had grown softer. She gave me a deep, searching look and said, "What difference does my liking someone make? Just because you love someone doesn't mean you can have them." In her eyes, I felt she liked me, and so I immediately took her hand and said, "Gulruch, if you want, love can be achieved." My words left her stunned. She asked, "Really? Can I truly have my love?" I nodded, gently caressing her soft palm. Her tender, beautiful pink hands were entirely within my grasp, and she didn't try to pull away once. She sat there calmly, without fear of what the villagers might think, without worry about anything. She looked at me quietly for a long time before finally saying, "Your wife must be waiting for you. You shouldn't let your honeymoon be ruined." With that, she stood up. I quickly held her hand firmly and said, "If you wish, I can give you more happiness and time than that. I don't even like my wife. She's a necessity, not love." Hearing this, she was shocked. I met her eyes and said, "Gulruch, can I say something? You won't get upset, will you?" When she shook her head, I softly admitted, "Gulruch, I've fallen in love with you. I want to make my life beautiful. I want to start a new journey with you." As soon as she heard this, her eyes lit up. She said, "Your companionship would bring me happiness too, Fahim. But what about your wife?" Her eyes were full of questions. "Will your wife allow this?" she asked. "Our meeting is impossible." Adjusting her scarf, she turned and began to walk away, leaving me surprised. How could a simple village girl from these remote hills speak with such eloquence? How could she express her feelings so effortlessly? There was neither hesitation nor shyness in her tone. She seemed completely ready for closeness with me. Her only concern was my wife, and I knew how to handle that easily. She had gone quite far when I got up and ran after her. "Listen, Gulruch," I said, "if Farzana wasn't in the picture, would you accept me?" She nodded instantly. "Fine," I replied. "I'll take care of things with my wife soon, and then one night I'll come to get you. You'll have to come with me to the hotel. Will you come?" I looked at her hopefully, and she nodded again without hesitation. Then I returned to the hotel, where my wife, Farzana, was waiting, visibly upset. As soon as she saw me, she asked angrily, "Where did you go so early in the morning? I woke up and kept waiting for you. Fahim, I was so scared. This is a strange place. How could you leave me like that?" I looked at her, annoyed, and said, "The way you were snoring so loudly, I got scared of you." Deliberately, I turned my face away, pouting, because I knew Farzana couldn't handle my sulking. It was the best way to dodge her questions. Immediately, she came closer, wrapped her arms around my neck, and sat at my feet. "Why are you upset?" she said softly. "I know I fell asleep early last night, but what could I do? Walking in these mountains tires me out so much that I fall asleep without realizing it." I didn't respond. I just turned away. She leaned closer, whispering in my ear, "Tonight will be beautiful, I promise. Please don't be upset anymore." Even though I didn't want to, a faint smile crossed my lips. I took her hand and led her to another village. But even there, I couldn't see the beauty that I had found in Gulruch. The entire day passed as Farzana and I wandered around. But in my mind, I kept thinking about Gulruch. Quietly, I slipped away for a moment to a small local pharmacy and bought some sleeping pills. I didn't let Farzana see, and she didn't suspect anything. That evening, when we returned to the hotel, I looked for an opportunity to give Farzana the sleeping pills. But she refused to have tea, coffee, or even herbal tea, no matter how much I insisted. Instead, she went into the bathroom. Exhausted, I lay down on the bed, thinking of Gulruch. Soon after, however, I was startled to see Farzana emerge from the bathroom in a revealing outfit. She wore a semi-transparent nightie, her face adorned with a smile, her lips painted bright red. She walked toward me slowly, her footsteps deliberate. But in my mind, I saw Gulruch in her place. If it had been Gulruch, the night would have felt entirely different. My desire would have reached its peak, and I would have eagerly embraced her. But with Farzana, I felt no interest. Her dusky complexion only further dampened my feelings. It was only out of obligation that I reluctantly spent the rest of the night with her. Farzana was swept away by waves of passion, while I, constrained by duty, yielded myself to her. Half the night passed like that. Eventually, I managed to pull away from her, pretending I was tired, and fell asleep. I thought I could bury the emotions I felt, but they kept surfacing. The next morning, as Farzana chatted excitedly about her plans for the day, my mind drifted back to Gulrukh's warm smile and her trusting eyes. She had ignited something within me that I couldn't ignore. As the day wore on, Farzana's excitement grew while I remained distracted. The scenic beauty of the mountains no longer held the same allure as before. Even when we stopped by the tranquil stream, which had mesmerized me on our first day here, it all felt dull and lifeless. In my mind, I saw only Gulrukh's face, her gentle laughter, and the warmth she radiated. Her presence had become a beacon in my thoughts, overshadowing everything else. That afternoon, Farzana suggested exploring another local village. She was eager to visit the bustling marketplace and buy a few souvenirs. I agreed, but my heart wasn't in it. As we strolled through the market, the sounds of laughter and the vivid colors of the stalls blurred into the background. Every now and then I caught glimpses of women in traditional attire, and my heart would skip a beat, thinking it might be her. Each time I was left disappointed, realizing that no one could compare to Gulrukh. Even as Farzana bargained for handcrafted shawls, I stood silently, my thoughts miles away. She noticed my silence and asked if I was feeling all right. I assured her I was fine, blaming my mood on the altitude. But inside, I was fighting a battle against emotions that refused to be ignored. By the evening, Farzana had finished her shopping and was happily discussing her plans for the next day. I nodded absent-mindedly, feigning interest. The truth was, I was already plotting how to steal another moment with Gulrukh. I knew it was wrong. Everything about it felt wrong, but the pull was undeniable. My heart, once so firmly anchored, now drifted freely, drawn to a woman who had come into my life by chance. Returning to the hotel that night, I pretended to be exhausted. As Farzana settled into bed, I quietly stepped out onto the balcony. The cool night air offered a temporary solace, but my thoughts remained restless. Staring at the stars, I wondered what had become of me. How had I, a man who had once prided himself on loyalty and commitment, found himself entangled in such a web of emotions? The realization weighed heavily on me. Gulrukh had brought a light into my life that I hadn't even known was missing. But in doing so, she had also cast a shadow over the very foundation of my marriage. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. The question was whether I had the courage to face the consequences of my choices, or whether I would continue to let my emotions rule over my actions. She too was tired and soon fell asleep. The next day, I again managed to find a way to meet Gulrukh. I promised her that I would come for her that night. Hearing this, she agreed, and I also assured her that I would take her ailing father to the city for treatment. I spent the rest of the day lovingly with Farzana, making sure she wouldn't suspect anything. That evening, without asking, I insisted she drink some tea, secretly mixing in a sleeping pill. She drank it, and within a short time was fast asleep. I waited until I was sure she wouldn't wake up, then quietly left the hotel. At night, the surrounding hills grew eerily silent and dark. The steep, winding paths were daunting, and I felt a growing fear. But the pull of desire and my infatuation with Gulrukh drove me on. I navigated those rugged paths until I reached her village and knocked on her door. It seemed she had been waiting for me. As soon as she heard my knock, she came out, telling me her father was in a deep sleep and wouldn't know of her leaving. With that, she quickly took my hand, and we hurried back to the hotel. On the way, she asked about my wife, and I reassured her that Farzana was sound asleep and wouldn't be a problem. Once at the hotel, I led her to my room. Seeing Farzana still lying in bed, she immediately became uneasy. "Your wife is still here. Didn't you book another room?" she asked. I shook my head and explained that Farzana had taken the sleeping medicine and wouldn't wake up easily. Hearing this, Gulrukh seemed satisfied and sat on the edge of the bed. I sat beside her, held her hand, and spoke to her about dreams of a colorful, joyous future. Slowly, she relaxed, leaning closer and eventually resting in my arms. But before anything further could happen, Farzana's eyes opened. She sat up and I was struck with shock. My heart pounded as Farzana stared at me in disbelief. She said nothing at first, just watching me with wide, stunned eyes. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice trembling with anger. Baba told me you weren't worthy of me, but I didn't listen. I married you, blinded by love, and now look at you. You couldn't change your nature even for our honeymoon. You brought someone else into our room. Her words were laced with bitterness, and I could see the deep betrayal in her eyes. At the same time, Gulrukh turned toward me, fury etched on her face. Why did you call me here if your wife was awake? She demanded, her voice sharp. Before I could respond, she pushed me away and stormed out of the room. I was left standing there, stunned and ashamed. I had betrayed my wealthy wife and tried to deceive her, only to be caught red-handed. The weight of my actions sank in as I realized the enormity of what I had done. Farzana began packing her belongings, speaking in a calm but firm tone that carried the gravity of her decision. I'll leave first thing in the morning, she declared, and I'll file for divorce. I won't stay with someone like you. Desperate, I fell to my knees and grabbed her feet, pleading. I was just overcome by temptation. The beauty of this place overwhelmed my senses. I lost my mind, but please forgive me. But Farzana wasn't swayed. She brushed off my apologies and her determination only grew. The commotion drew the attention of the hotel staff. One of the waiters, who had been assigned to our room service, knocked on the door, concerned about the noise. He opened it cautiously, and his eyes widened in shock as he saw us. Looking at me, he asked, Why was Gulrukh here? His words stunned me. How do you know her? I asked, genuinely puzzled. A small, knowing smile crossed his face. Has she made you her target too? He replied. Those words left me speechless. My betrayal, my infatuation, my deception, all of it seemed trivial in that moment as I realized that Gulrukh wasn't who I thought she was. Her familiarity with the staff, the way the waiter spoke as if he had seen this play out before. It all made me question what I had done and who I had trusted. I was left to grapple with the mess I had made, knowing full well that my impulsive choices had shattered everything I held dear. When my wife led him into the room, he immediately started explaining. This Gulrukh is a notorious woman. She lures unsuspecting tourists with her charm, traps them in a web of deceit, and then robs them blind. Many of our hotel guests have fallen victim to her schemes, but we can't do anything since they willingly let her into their rooms. But you two, you're a married couple. How did she end up in your room? Hearing his words, I froze. Embarrassment surged through me as I realized the gravity of my actions. I couldn't bring myself to meet my wife's gaze, but I could feel the sharp sting of her disgust. She looked at me with pure disdain and said, At least you weren't robbed. But honestly, what did you have that she could steal? Whatever you have, it's all thanks to me. I'm the one funding your lavish lifestyle from head to toe. Not anymore, though. With that, she turned away and refused to speak to me again. I pleaded with her, begged for forgiveness, but she remained cold and unyielding. The next morning, she began packing her bags, arranging her trip home. As if that weren't enough, she called her father and laid out the entire truth about what had happened. Meanwhile, I was left grappling with the reality of what I'd done. Knowing the truth about Gulrukh made it even worse. The beauty that had ensnared me was nothing more than a cruel deception. I had fallen for a false facade, a manipulative trap, and the shame of it all overwhelmed me. On our way back, I couldn't help but dig further into Gulrukh's background. The more I learned, the clearer it became that she had been deceiving countless others long before me. She had no sick father. She lived alone. Her family was nowhere to be found, and her entire life revolved around entrapping and exploiting others. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. The boldness she displayed, her confidence, it wasn't charm, it was cunning. Unlike the other modest, shy women in the village, she was a predator, skilled at manipulation and deceit. She was far from the innocent, starry-eyed girl I thought I had encountered. It took me too long to see her true colors. By the time we reached home, my wife had already sent over divorce papers. She wanted nothing more to do with me. I tried again and again to make amends, visiting her family's house to plead my case. But she wouldn't forgive me. I couldn't stop thinking about the enormity of my mistake. I had a wife who loved me dearly, who accepted me despite my flaws, who left her privileged life to be with me. She wasn't stunning in looks, but her heart was beautiful. She had treated my parents with kindness, even when they were difficult. She endured their harsh words without complaint. She never flaunted her wealth or made me feel small because of my modest background. Instead, she embraced my world and tried her best to adapt to it. She was willing to spend her entire life with me in my simple home, and yet I had betrayed her. I decided to make one final attempt. I went to her house, fell at her feet, and wept openly. "Forgive me," I begged. "I don't want to live without you." Perhaps it was divine intervention, or perhaps her heart softened just enough. But to my great relief, she agreed. She returned to me, to our home. Her graciousness knew no bounds. She forgave my parents and resumed her efforts to care for them. I was humbled and determined to change. That betrayal marked a turning point in my life. I no longer looked at other women. I learned to value the love I had taken for granted. Sometimes we get so enchanted by surface beauty that we fail to see the treachery behind it. It was only after everything fell apart that I realized how deceiving appearances can be. I could have lost everything: my marriage, my dignity, my peace of mind. Yet by some miracle, I was given a second chance. And this time I vowed never to repeat the mistakes I had made. I began to see my wife for who she truly was. Not just a wealthy woman, but a kind, generous, and forgiving soul. I came to understand that real beauty is found in the heart, not in superficial appearances. Today, I am a changed man. I am devoted to my wife, and I cherish the life we have together. Looking back, I see clearly that my initial interest in her was driven by material gain. But over time, I came to realize her true value. I no longer saw her as a means to an end, but as a partner, someone who stood by me through my lowest moments and never wavered. Though now I wake up every day grateful for her presence in my life. For anyone traveling to new places, I offer this cautionary tale. Not everyone you meet has good intentions. Even in the most beautiful settings, there are those who prey on vulnerability. It's easy to get caught up in fleeting attractions, but we must be mindful and grounded. I learned that the hard way, but I am fortunate to have emerged from it with a deeper appreciation for what truly matters. My wife's capacity to forgive and her unwavering loyalty have given me a new perspective on love and life. I know now that I must never take her for granted again. Together we have built a stronger, more meaningful relationship. That is my greatest achievement.